Nick Skrip from Fantrax. Here are my fantasy football streams of the week for week 3. Russell Wilson faces Miami, and he's coming off of a QB3 fantasy performance in week 2 against the Commanders, where he threw for 308 yards and 3 touchdowns. He has 5 touchdowns through 2 games. Mac Jones threw for 231 last week, 229 from Justin Herbert week 1 against the Dolphins. I like Russell Wilson this week, especially with Jerry Jeudy getting healthy. C.J. Stroud faces the Jaguars. He was just outside the top 12 for fantasy last week, where he threw 30 for 47, 384 passing yards, and 2 touchdowns. The passing volume for Stroud is there as he ranks number 3 in passing attempts with 91. Mahomes went for 305 and 2 touchdowns last week against the Jaguars. Week 1 in Richardson's first start ever, he threw for 223 yards, had a passing and a rushing touchdown. Nico Collins and Tank Dell stepped up last week. Robert Woods has been reliable, and we still have guys like Dalton Schultz and John Mechie who can step up for the Texans. Hunter Henry faces the Jets this week. Jake Ferguson scored a touchdown against them last week. In week 1, Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox combined for 7 catches against the Jets. Hunter Henry has finished as the tight end 1 and tight end 2 for fantasy football in the first 2 weeks. He scored 16 plus fantasy points in both games. He's been targeted 13 times. He's had over 50 receiving yards in both week 1 and week 2 and scored a touchdown in both games. Hunter Henry played 92% of the snaps last week. Ride the hot hand. Hayden Hurst faces the Seahawks this week. Sam Laporta just finished with 63 receiving yards against them. Seattle is top 3 in passing yards per game allowed this season. Hurst in week 1 led Carolina in receiving. He caught 5 of his 7 targets for 41 receiving yards. He scored a touchdown. The Saints were a tough matchup last week, but I think he gets back on track this week. And then Jake Ferguson gets the Cardinals this week. Darren Waller finished with 76 receiving yards last week. In week 1, Logan Thomas led Washington in targets against the Cardinals. In week 1, Jake Ferguson saw 7 targets. In week 2, he got some end zone looks and scored a touchdown, so some encouraging signs for him. The yardage might be iffy right now, but I think it's a plus matchup. Then for defenses, we have the Patriots facing the Jets. They go from facing the Eagles and then the Dolphins to Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson has completed just 26 passes through 2 weeks and has had 4 interceptions through those 2 games. Seattle faces Carolina, and yes, they have allowed a decent amount of points so far this season, but last week they forced 2 fumbles, they had a pick, a defensive touchdown, and 2 sacks. The Panthers have scored just 27 total points through 2 weeks of football. And then we have the Pittsburgh Steelers against the Raiders. They had 2 defensive touchdowns last week, an interception, 3 forced fumbles, and 6 sacks. The Raiders have also scored just 27 points through 2 weeks of football. Follow the Fantrax page on all socials for consistent fantasy football content.